We actually have a very, very special guest, you guys, so I hope you all are excited. We have Jonathan. He is going to be hosting a fireside chat with none other than David Schwartz, the CTO of Ripple. And they are going to be speaking about the XRP Ledger and the future of Web3. And big shout out to the Sologenic community.
All right, how's everybody doing today? There's some fun couches we got here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan G. Blanco. I'm the founder and CEO of Nifmint. We do NFT things and for brands. And I'm really excited today to be able to interview the CTO of Ripple. If you're here, I'm sure you've heard of Ripple. So with that, I'd love to welcome you to David Schwartz. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, let's level set the room for people really quickly. Ripple has been a top crypto and a top blockchain pretty much for over the last decade.
Got to correct you to XRP Ledger.
Or sorry, XRP Ledger. Thank you.
I get fired if I don't.
No, I appreciate the correction. For the last decade. So can you just, I'm sure you've done this in other interviews, but for those of us who are here, can you just give us a quick little overview of the project from that last decade, and not the whole decade, but like the inception point and when you came into the project?
Sure. Just first, I want to say it's great to be up here with someone who takes business casual as seriously as I do.
Got the J's on.
Yeah, I don't dress up for anybody. Probably don't either. So yeah, I mean, I've been doing this since 2011. It's really hard to sort of mentally project back to that time, but Bitcoin was essentially the only game in town, and people were just starting to make clones of it. And I think the first cracks in the proof of work narrative were starting to emerge then. I know it sounds ridiculous today, but the thought then was that anybody could mine, and that like literally while you were sleeping, your PC would mine and you would just make money. And I mean, we know now that's tremendously economically naive. Someone's going to have the cheapest power, someone's going to have the best ASIC. So it was just starting to not deliver on that decentralization promise, and transaction fees were just first starting to come up. And if the narrative is like, be your own bank, no middlemen, it didn't really feel like that. So with a bunch of other people, Jed McCaleb, at the very beginning, and Stephen Thomas, and later Chris Larson and other people, we built a blockchain that we really felt was meant to be owned by the people who were using it. And I know you think that's true of other blockchains, but it's just not. It's just not. The analogy that I sometimes use is Uber. Uber is not built for drivers and riders. I mean, it's built to be good enough for drivers and riders that they use it, but the owners of Uber want to make as much money as they possibly can. And every dollar they make is a dollar that a rider pays that a driver doesn't get. And the owners of Uber want to keep Uber's profits as high as they can. They make it just good enough that the riders and the drivers will use it. And that really is the model of many cryptocurrency projects. So if you look at Bitcoin, the transaction fees are as high as the miners can get them. And the limiting factor is, of course, if they were $5,000 a transaction, they wouldn't make any money because there wouldn't be any transaction. But they're incentivized to produce scarcity. And so we wanted to build a system that didn't have those kinds of incentives, a system that's built for the people who use it, a system that really delivers on the no middleman. Now, I wish I could say that we 100% delivered on that promise and it's all roses, but I'm an engineer at heart, and everything is trade-offs. Everything has advantages and disadvantages. There's no such thing as a free lunch and all of those things. But the blockchain that resulted from that, what we today call the XRP Ledger, has very, very low fees, very, very high transaction rates, and it's very, very it's much more decentralized than most other blockchains. And the reason for that is that fundamentally there aren't people trying to profit off the people using it. And so that's why, like, when I talk to people who are building projects like NFTs, I mean, a blockchain where they're the actual stakeholders, the people using it are the stakeholders, is a very different concept.
So it sounds like the XRP Ledger, based off what you're saying, has some good use cases for high throughput high transaction volume type of businesses. I want to go back to Bitcoin just for a second, as you brought it up. From a XRP or Ripple point of view, do you see it as an either or do you still see there being a place for Bitcoin as, call it, store of value, et cetera, and then using XRP for more transaction throughput? Is it an either or, winner take all, or how do you view that, I guess, when it comes to how you think of the Bitcoin versus XRP or Ripple?
I think there's kind of two ways that you can look at that. One is looking at the blockchains themselves, and the other is looking at the digital assets themselves, and you kind of get different answers. But I think in both cases, certainly for layer 1 blockchains, it's not an either or. You might like Bitcoin as an asset, but you don't like 10-minute confirmation times. You can move Bitcoin on the XRP ledger. You can say, Bitcoin is the digital asset that I like. I like its tokenomics. I like its volume and liquidity. I'm happy with its volatility. I want to use Bitcoin. That doesn't mean you have to transact on the Bitcoin blockchain. Most Bitcoin transactions don't take place on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? A lot of them take place on centralized exchanges. And then there's the question of, well, what layer 1 blockchain has the characteristics I like? Does it have low fees? Does it have fast confirmation? Is it decentralized? Is it censorship resistant? And you don't necessarily have to be locked in to the same decision, to parallel decisions. But I also think fundamentally the idea that there's going to be one world currency is just hopelessly naive. I just don't see. And even if you do think that's going to happen, let's say you're a Bitcoin maximalist, Bitcoin, not the blockchain, but the asset. You think that Bitcoin is the be-all, end-all asset. Well, first of all, people are going to want to do all different kinds of things with that asset, and they'll need systems with different semantics. But also, we're not there today, right? 99.99% of the world's value is not in Bitcoin. And so we're going to need interoperability. We're going to need on-ramps and off-ramps. We're going to need all of the same things that the Bitcoin blockchain can't provide any of those. So there's still a lot of work to be done, not in the not right in the Bitcoin.
Sure. And so, in the XRP Ledger context, I think a lot of people here know, it to be used in banking, and you have some banking partnerships and relationships that you've built overall. Can you walk us through how that works and how they think about that? And then I'd love to get back to the NFTs here after that.
Yeah. So Ripple is a company. It's centralized. We have a CEO. We have employees. We have people who hold Ripple stock, who own equity in the company. It's just like any other corporation. And we wanted to figure out what we could do. We wanted a decentralized blockchain, but there's, just like in the Bitcoin ecosystem, there's all kinds of companies in that ecosystem. And Ripple is one of those companies that, among other things that Ripple does, we interact with the XRP Ledger. And the thing that we decided circa 2014, 2015, we were thinking, all these companies were doing all these different projects. There was just starting to be an explosion of grassroots adoption of crypto. And that was when buying things with Bitcoin was all the rage, and there was this big increase in your average person had heard of Bitcoin. It went from something that only nerds knew about to something that was on the news. And so there was that sort of inflection point, and Ripple started to be introspective and say, what can we do? What's missing that we can do? And what we thought about was we were very inspired by the internet. And most people think of the internet as a bottom-up kind of technology that's like for the people, but it wasn't in the early days. It started with military and government and researchers and people who had very focused use cases. So we thought, who could have a focused use case? And remittances and international payments, everybody agrees is broken. How many people in here have made an international payment? And how many have had a bad experience? Right? How many of you had to call up to check if the payment succeeded, and they said, we don't know, call back again in a couple more days? Right? I see lots of hands going, it's terrible. And it's nice when people have a problem that you have a solution to, rather than you say, I have this new technology that does something totally new and different. You're like, oh, it's kind of cool. It's really nice when you say, look, there's something in your life that sucks, and I can make it better. That's a much easier case. And so Ripple said, we're going to, but if you're going to go after institutional adoption, because that's what it's going to take, it's going to take institutional adoption, it can't be 3 people in a garage. It has to be an organized operation. So we said what Ripple, the company, is going to do is we're going to focus on building high-quality technologies that will allow institutional adoption. And so we look, what are the blockers? Why can't banks use a cryptocurrency to settle? And the answer is their messaging systems are antiquated. They don't even know where the money has to go when they make a payment. The messaging isn't even closed loop. It's back in the 70s if you're lucky. And so we focused on building a system called RippleNet, which is an institutional messaging and settlement system that can settle with a digital asset. Meantime, all kinds of other projects on the XRP Ledger, focusing on things like payments, but also things that are not payments, stable coins, which are kind of payment adjacent, and all kinds of different projects, including more recently things like NFTs. So there's an ecosystem of development on the XRP Ledger, and then there's Ripple, who's, among other things, working to drive institutional adoption, use the XRP Ledger as a settlement.
Yeah, and just real quick on that notion, do you think sometimes people just get confused about XRP and Ripple, like the relationship between it? Because you're talking about Ripple being a centralized entity, it's a business, right? It's a company, and then XRP Ledger being decentralized overall. What's the best way for people to? I mean, you kind of outlined it there, but what's the best way for people to think about that? Because I think sometimes I hear people say things like, "Oh, well, Ripple's centralized, so it's bad in crypto, et cetera." But everything that you're describing right now is like, hey, no bank is going to want to use a technology, at least not right now, that is going to, take complete control out of their hands, right? So how would you kind of
It's
talk to that?
actually very interesting. So I've heard a lot of people say that no bank would want to use a decentralized system. They want to use a system they can control. The problem is, if you are Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Credit Suisse, JP Morgan Chase, and maybe 2 or 3 others, that argument is perfect. But that's what, 5 banks? How many banks are there? Right? There's thousands. If you're any other bank but those 5 or 6 I just mentioned, a system controlled by the banks is a system controlled by your competitors. And if I say, well, would you want to rely for your business on a system controlled by your competitors? That sounds a lot less exciting, right? People think of banks as like, people will say these things like, oh, the big banks, they've got the whole system under their thumb, and the whole world's arranged for them. Your local bank probably feels the same way. But when you think of a big bank, you might think of your local bank. They're not big in like the world of banks. So in the world of banks, like the idea of a system that their competitors can't exclude them from or control resonates very well with them. And obviously, they wouldn't trust Ripple to like if we ran the system, they wouldn't, the level of confidence would be limited to the amount of trust they could have in us, which while we would love them to have as much trust in us as we could get them to have, we would prefer they not have to. And so, believe it or not, like the incentive is to build a decentralized system that nobody can control, because that's a more valuable. That spans jurisdictions. Countries like Saudi Arabia don't want the United States or the EU to have control over internal payments in the region, and rightfully so. They're a sovereign country. There's no inherent reason why the United States should have a veto over a payment between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, and those countries are not going to stand for that level of control. And they're going to, if it can be a decentralized system that's fair to everyone, that might be like the next best thing.
Yeah, I see your point. Thanks for outlining that for everybody. So I want to move to NFTs real quick. So you're making lots of headway on the NFT side. There's also the community fund. I think it's 250 million. Is that right, community fund? Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So the XRP Ledger was never originally designed for NFTs. Obviously, NFTs weren't a thing when the XRP Ledger was built. And it's not like the Ethereum blockchain where you can do anything on it. It's not a general purpose blockchain. There's obviously disadvantages to it not being a general purpose blockchain. You can't just write a smart contract and do something. But there are huge advantages to it not being a general purpose blockchain. For one thing, the just sort of general purpose blockchains are more expensive and have lower throughput because it's more complex to run a general purpose blockchain. But the big disadvantage is you've heard of people who've had NFTs stolen from them because they agreed to smart contracts and didn't know what they did. That power can be used against people. It's a very high cost to understand what you're agreeing to or what can happen. The XRP Ledger is a fixed function ledger, and it didn't have NFT functions. But someone named Weitzu Win came up with a standard called XLS14, and he bashed a square peg in a round hole. I mean, it's ugly from an engineering standpoint, but he made it work. He made NFTs work with no changes to the core protocol. But, not great. So a group of people, including myself, set to design a fixed function feature set that included probably 90% of what people want to do with NFTs in the XRP Ledger. That standard is called XLS20, and it's now available. It's live on the XRP Ledger, and it's purpose-built for the vast majority of things you want to do with NFTs. If you want to do some really weird thing that we didn't think of, you have to go to a more general purpose blockchain. But as long as you're within that sort of set of functions that we have, the advantages that you get are very low transaction costs, tiny fractions of a penny, very high finality, very rapid finality, 5 or 6 seconds, and high throughput. And it covers a significant fraction of the feature set that you want. Again, like the target market for the XRP Ledger is to build features that enable people to use the blockchain.
That was super interesting. And being that Ripple, for example, has taken these inroads from the banking side, when you think about the NFT side, is there a vertical or customer set that you're thinking about that would be more preferential for NFTs, or that you'd be targeting to be using the NFTs?
I guess it comes down to what kind of time frame you want to think about. So obviously, in the shorter time frame, collectibles are where all the action. If you said, what are people using NFTs for most today? It's collectibles. But there's a huge growing group of people using them in gaming. Is like one of the biggest growing areas. It's not just a pure collectible, where maybe you could take an avatar across games, or maybe like when you move from an older game to a newer game, which game companies want you to move from the older game to the newer game. They don't want to stay in the older game. What they want to do is they want to keep developing on their newest game and reach as many people as possible with developmental efforts. The problem is when you move from an old game to a new game, it's like graduating from junior high school and going into high school. You were the coolest guy in junior high school, you were a senior, now you go to high school and you're like the lowest of the low. If it takes something with you, then you would be able to migrate more easily, and that actually solves a problem in the gaming space. There's also real estate NFTs, but I have to say in the longer term, that there's the two things that I'm most excited about are NFTs that represent ownership of things in the real world, like smart objects that could understand that they're owned by the owner of an NFT. But I think even more interesting than that is every single person in this room has bundles of digital rights that they own, whether it's songs, whether it's books on Amazon Prime, whether it's movies that they may have bought on Hulu or Netflix. And the problem is these marketplaces are not built for you. If you decide that Amazon Prime sucks and you want to switch to Hulu because it's supported better on your device, you lose all of the stuff that you bought. That sucks for you. That's great for Hulu and Netflix because they lock you in. And it's not built for the creators. You might think it's built for the creators, but it's not. Imagine if you just released a blockbuster movie. You have a window of maybe 3 weeks in which I'll buy that movie for 22 bucks. If I don't buy that movie for 22 bucks in those 3 weeks, I'll never do it. Why would I buy it for 22 bucks if I'm thinking a year from now when I want to watch the movie again, I might not have Netflix anymore, or I might not have Hulu anymore? Hulu's what, $79 a month? Like, what if they go up and I drop them and I switch to a better service? I'll lose that movie that I paid 22 bucks for. I'm just going to rent it at the lower price. And anytime you see a marketplace that isn't built for the buyers or the sellers, that's something that needs to be disrupted. And I think NFTs could be video games that you own. Are there digital rights? Like, digital rights is a huge, huge business, and NFTs are portable digital rights. They could be the solution to that problem. And that's massive, but of course, fairly far out because that whole marketplace is locked up by big players who are not going to give any space to it.
And David, my final question for you. So you've been in the space in crypto pretty much since the dawn of it. And what's your outlook for, call it the next 6 months, year? What's your crystal ball say?
I mean, honestly, I'm a little depressed about the FTX collapse, and I am concerned about what dominoes are going to fall. But I also don't want that to distract from people who are building things. That doesn't make anything technological that somebody built go away. That doesn't make something that's been developed not exist anymore. And so I'm hoping that when all the ashes of this clear out, the projects that had solid fundamentals, were building good tech and building products that solve real problems, will still be there, and maybe they'll be a little easier to find. That, honestly, though, it is a little depressing right now, but do not let that discourage you from building. Venture capital's out there. That's why we created the Creator Fund. The problems still exist. The technologies still work. I kind of hope that people can keep at. I've seen this happen. I've been through Docs collapsed. I mean, there have been a lot of these before, and many times we emerged out the other side. So I think we're going to again keep building.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks so much for joining us. It was great conversation. And everybody, I hope you're enjoying DCENTRAL. Make sure to talk to David, hang out here longer. There's lots of great events coming up, and we'll see you all here a little bit later. Thanks so much.
And thanks for filling in.
Yeah.